Cooney and Mr. Chair Directors, good to be with you this morning. As noted, I'm Michael Pimentel, Executive Director of the California Transit Association, and I've presented to this board in the past, but I will admit that many of you are new faces to me. And so I want to give you a little bit of background on my association, the work that we conduct. And so as we go to the next slide, I want to note that the association is a nonprofit trade organization that represents more than 220 transit affiliated entities nationwide. That includes 85 transit agencies in California. In your region, these members, of course, include the San Diego MTS, but also North County Transit District and the Losan Rail Corridor Agency. We exist to advocate for California's transit industry and to pursue policies and funding that support and advance public transit in our state. And so, for our more than 60-year history, we have been involved in nearly every major transit policy and funding discussion here in Sacramento, ultimately delivering major wins for transit agencies and their riders. And in recent years, some of this work has included Senate Bill 1, which provided transit agencies with $1 billion annually in new funds, SB 125, which provided a one-time infusion of $5.1 billion for transit agencies statewide, and that included $283 million for the San Diego MTS and $113 million for Sandag. Now, most recently, last year, this work resulted in the reauthorization of the Cap and Trade program, now Cap and Invest program, which is part of that process, extended continuous appropriations for transit capital and projects and operations totaling $600 million annually. Now, as I move through this presentation, I do want to note that those last two efforts were efforts led by, one under the chairship of your CEO, Sharon Cooney. And so, Sharon, appreciate the great partnership over these past few years. So as we click to the next slide, I'm going to begin to dive into the Transit Transformation Task Force report and note that our historic engagement at the state level meant that we were central players in the CalSTA-led Transit Transformation Task Force. This task force, as Sharon Cooney has noted, was established by CalSTA Secretary Tokso Mashakin pursuant to SB 125. Its goal was to analyze the state of public transit in California and to develop a report of recommendations to the governor, to the legislature, to grow transit ridership and improve the transit experience for all users. Now, the association was well represented on this 25-member task force by 12 members, including, again, your CEO, Sharon Cooney, and myself. And while, as we'll discuss in a moment, the task force report and recommendations were ultimately underwhelming, that was not due to a lack of interest or engagement from the industry in trying to move forward substantive recommendations. So as we click to the next slide, you'll just see a quick image of our first kickoff meeting. But we were quite literally traveling the state over a 2-year time horizon, working to develop recommendations, looking to advance this report of recommendations. So on the next slide, you'll begin to see how we engaged as an industry through my association. I noted on an earlier slide that the association approached this effort as a break the glass moment. And for us, that's a moment to fundamentally rethink how public transit operates in our state and to put into place the policies and funding mechanisms necessary to expand and enhance our services and to align state support for transit with the state's rhetoric and ambitions for public transit. I'll note for you, there's a bit of dissonance there that we find ourselves facing every year in the state house. And so to that end, the association's executive committee, that's our 25-member board of directors, established a 14-member Transit Transformation Advisory Committee, which was in short charged with establishing our legislative, budgetary, and regulatory priorities for the task force and reviewing and responding to task force proposals. Now, to inform our work, the advisory committee engaged with the industry statewide, and that happened through a survey that we led, engaging our members as well as the membership of our sister association, the California Association for Coordinated Transportation, for recommendations on more than 20 topics. Now, the advisory committee reviewed these recommendations ultimately with a goal of establishing and advancing a set of priority topics that we would encourage the task force to focus on that included on the next slide funding with the encouragement of focusing on addressing near-term funding needs and identifying new funding mechanisms to fulfill the mid to long-term funding needs of our systems. Performance metrics, this is what CEO Cooney has acknowledged in TDA reform, with the goal of updating the transit performance metrics in state law today that I will note were first established in the 1970s and that were focused at that time on cost containment for transit services, not the broader goals that I would evince we are focused on in industry today, like improving service effectiveness, expanding transit access, and facilitating connections to critical services. Now, in addition, and on the next slide, you'll see another balance of our priorities focused on things like ZEB transition, with a focus on reevaluating the state's well-intentioned, but unfortunately hugely expensive and operationally questionable ICT regulation, which is creating challenges for agencies statewide. And finally, on project and service delivery, with the goal of streamlining or removing barriers to transit projects so we as an industry can build and sustain, I'll really emphasize that sustain, more projects like your Bus on Shoulder pilot project on State Route 52. I understand there have been challenges in keeping that project operational, but they're the types of projects we want to see advanced at the state. And so on the next slide, I'll note that as we encourage focus on those priority topics, we also convene as an advisory committee to review recommendations seeded from our membership to establish very specific priorities on, again, more than 20 topics. Now, this work required ongoing meetings. We held nearly 20 advisory committee level meetings in our association, 10 meetings at our executive committee to ensure that our voice was heard throughout this process. And this work ultimately led to what were coordinated presentations before the full task force as it met on a periodic basis over its 2-year life. Now, on the next slide, I'll note that while our recommendations ultimately informed the release of the task force report, and that was done on December 2025, there are many ways in which the report ultimately fell short. Now, the report includes an analysis on transit challenges, and in fairness, we think that the review of those challenges is largely comprehensive. But I would note that it omitted some very critical data, perhaps more negative data that we had submitted on the continued funding uncertainty that our industry faces year over year. For example, we're looking to preserve funding that has been committed by the state to our transit agencies. That creates challenge, that creates impacts on the ability to plan for projects and services, as well as on our real world experience on ZEBs, where the cost, of course, is stubbornly high, creates challenges for our agencies that ultimately may be cannibalizing monies that can be used for operations. And I would note then finally that the report's recommendations, while responsive to the requirements in law, there were specific things that the task force was charged with reviewing. Many of the recommendations ultimately lacked the specificity necessary to be useful to the legislature. And I'll note that's not just our opinion. One of your state senators, Catherine Blakespear herself, has opined on the lack of seriousness in some of the recommendations to actually make them valid for legislative consideration. Now, as we click to the next slide, I do want to go into a little bit more background on those major deficiencies. And I would note that perhaps the most major deficiencies in the report and its recommendations were on funding and performance metrics. These, again, were priorities that we had communicated as an association, that your agency had communicated throughout the task force process. And I would flag that on funding, the report really focuses only on reprogramming and refocusing existing revenues, supporting local communities and raising revenues themselves, and then generating revenues through value capture. And so said differently, the report includes no recommendations on new state funding for transit. And this is despite, again, the task force members submitting ideas on this front. And I would note this is despite the task force taking a vote at its final meeting to include in the report a menu of new state funding options for consideration by the legislature. Now, on performance metrics, the report makes some progress on our interest in removing penalties that exist over our metrics today. but it ultimately punts on identifying new specific metrics to carry us forward. And it ultimately leaves this work to yet another body to be established, to consider, to discuss, to ultimately advance some recommendations on the performance metric front. And so, as I conclude my report and open it up to any questions, I do want to note that on the next slide, you'll see we were, as an association, compelled to respond to the report with a letter to the legislature that detailed for us the observations on those areas where the report fell short, and also signaled to our interest in being engaged on an ongoing basis to pick up for those deficiencies in the report. And so our response, while it's even-handed, it notes that some of those deficiencies were the result of a lack of resources for the task force. We had resources to convene meetings. We didn't have resources to do deep analytical work, for example. We were also faced with some limitations on how we could meet, how we could confer, because we were subject to the state's Bagley-Keene laws. That is the state level Brown Act, if you will, which meant that we could not have side meetings, we could not have serialized meetings to debate matters that were of import to the task force. Now, of course, while those things are considerations on resources and process, I would just flag for you that there is an observation that there was a lack of political will, perhaps from the administration in moving forward those more substantive recommendations that perhaps would have invited a bit of a thornier political discussion here in Sacramento. And so, of course, happy to go into further detail, but know that we want to keep this report relatively tight. So I'm going to stop here, invite any questions or comments from directors. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Pimentel. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do. Manny Rodriguez, if you can please make your way to the podium.
Good morning, Board of Directors. My name is Manny Rodriguez. I'm here on behalf of Ride SD. We're a nonprofit advocacy group with hundreds of supporters. Our mission is to improve transportation in San Diego through public education, community events, and grassroots organizing. We also share the disappointment with Senator Blakespear and many folks with this report. I thank Michael Pimentel for the presentation today. It had some good information. But as he said, the report was disappointing, and what I found missing from his presentation was a deeper explanation as to why. Who I trust that Michael and the 12 members of his association on that task force did try to push the envelope, but who were the other 13 members? Who was holding this back? He vaguely mentioned political will. Can you be more specific? On behalf of transit riders everywhere, we want to hold people accountable for not doing what is needed to meet the moment. So if Michael or someone here could please share some more specifics about where this went wrong, who needs to be held accountable, and who transit riders need to be calling, we would really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Blair Bickman, if you can please unmute yourself.
Hi, Blair Beekman. Thanks for this item and the public comment on this item. Yeah, it kind of ties into my initial public comment. Oh, by the way, I wanted to comment on the consent calendar, and you guys moved a little too quickly. I couldn't hand it to the future. For this item, however, yeah, it ties in nicely to you're dealing with upcoming transit cuts. Well, how to deal with in 2021. I guess you're trying to ask that in this session. I imagine you're working and coordinating with Sandag about best practices, how to develop budgeting in the upcoming year, and it will be important. I think different programs going on. You have right there, so individual service. I think that is something to really be considering. And how to talk about future.
Blair, we are unable to hear you. Oh, it seems like we're having some sort of...
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me better now? Can you hear me better now? Okay.
Yes,
boy, I'm really. What do you want to do?
Your time has just expired.
Okay. Well, what do you want to do? Can I start again?
We were unable to understand the gist of what you had to say. Thank you again for calling in. Clerk, do we have any other public comment?
We do not.
Okay, we will now open board discussion on this item, and we will begin with Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Stepp.
Thank you so much, Chair. I want to thank Mr. Pimentel and Sharon and Julia. I received a briefing on this a couple months ago, I believe. My office has been following this task force with high hopes that have been dashed. But I do appreciate the work and just showing up in the space. I had questions, but they were answered through the presentation, because my main question was, how does a task force get together and put forward recommendations and then are not able to vote on them? Right? Like that I think that's my main issue procedurally. No matter how the vote went down, we would have had to live with that. But my issue is that the members, actual members, it sounds like we're not able to vote on what is being put forward to the legislature. For me, that's a more of a fundamental issue and problem that we can't do anything right now in this space, but something that I would like to explore and follow up on. Because I have, been a part of a state task force, had to deal with Badgley Keene. I have to deal with that as a local elected official, but the state is particularly stringent when it comes to their laws. And then on top of that, have to meet online, which doesn't allow for in-person kind of discussion. But if there are recommendations that the task force put forward, or at least ideas that they put forward that they were not allowed to vote on, that is really, in my mind, the crux of the issue here. And so I would like to explore that a little further, but also have some confidence in the fact that the association will be working with the legislature to make, I guess, the task force the voice heard, to put forward actual recommendations that don't reflect things that we're kind of trying to do anyway, right? Like working with CBOs, trying to make the best out of our fare box recovery, all these things we're doing, trying to put measures on the ballot locally. These are things that are in the report that we're already doing. So anyway, I just I know this is an info item. I really don't have too many more questions because I received a briefing on it. My office has been following this, so we've been kind of like in the loop the whole time. I think there were some in the analysis, there's some talk about different types of tax measures that we normally don't do in San Diego, which I think is an interesting discussion. Some out of Boston, some examples there, payroll tax and the like, but the recommendations don't lend themselves to any of those innovative ideas. And so I don't know, Sharon, if you have any additional comments on that.
Yeah, and I think Michael, I think I'll take the issue of process. So we did meet, that first meeting was online, but every other meeting was in a different location in the state. Never been to Bakersfield, so that was fun. But the gist of it is we would vote on things that were brought forward based on what the staff of CalSTA wanted us to talk about. And so the agenda would be very specific line by line things that were very in the weeds, like you said, things we're already doing as an industry, things we're already attempting to do, how to improve our access to, for instance, Caltrans right away so we can have bus only lanes, things like that. And those were things that sometimes were very contentious on the committee where the vote was a split vote. That happens with every committee, but I don't think that difference was really reflected all that much in the report. The other thing is that we kept saying from day one, the most important thing is sustainable funding. How do we get to that? And they pushed it off to the last meeting. 2 years of talking about minutia, kind of ignoring the elephant in the room. That's my perspective. I'm not going to speak for the association or Michael, but I just wanted to explain to you what the process was. And in the end, they didn't take a vote on the final report. We didn't have a say in what was the final report that was given to the legislature.
Just real briefly though, on the issue of items on the agenda, I do, normally the chair is in touch with staff, right, to drive that. And that is something that has to be, the members of the task force have to take initiative when it comes to that. Did that happen?
So the chair of the committee was actually a member of the administration.
Okay.
So it was not a member of the industry itself. And we frequently were frustrated when we saw items on the agenda that were being brought forward and we had no idea where they were being generated from. Even some of our members who were on working groups for very specific ideas. And for instance, our own CFO was talking to the staff of CalSTA about TDA reform, but none of the conversations that he had made it into the final report or recommendation.
And that was the crux of SB 125, I thought.
It was part of it.
Part
Yes,
of it.
yes. So my point being, it was not as, and I think the Bagley-Keene aspects of it probably made it challenging for CalSTA to have those conversations with in more transparent manner. But we were frequently kind of given a slate of things to discuss that weren't vetted with us beforehand.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Steppe. Director Minto.
Well, thanks for having me here. It's been a long time. Interesting report. Raised a couple of questions. First thing I'm going to talk about is the agenda items that you talked about seem to be staff generated. As an elected official, we understand how that happens a lot because most of our council meetings and other things are staff generated. And sometimes we wonder why there would be so many remedial items on an agenda. And because it's better to get into the meat and potatoes so that we actually solve things. So I appreciate your being very candid about that, so to speak. And somebody, maybe, seeing how I'm not here all the time, I don't get a lot to say in this, but so it's more of an outsider's approach. Maybe they need to change who the chair is, somebody that's more dynamic and has the courage to drive the discussion better, because I think that helps all of us. And then I think my biggest question is, and probably not to be, maybe it couldn't be discussed today or pointed out today, but what are the actual impacts or possible impacts to the operation of MTS because of not having something completed in this bill?
Well, the hope was that there would be a group of things that could be recommended to the legislature that could then drive forward the transformation that was intended by SB 125. SB 125 was never meant to be the solution to the challenges, the fiscal challenges, the sustainable challenges of transit in California. So the goal was, this is stopgap funding. Now we're going to do this, get a report, and then generate something policy that would then be able to help all of us throughout the state make sure our communities had robust, better transit. So I guess that's what's missing is the.
Well, that explains it, because without that discussion or even a list of projects to go for, you don't make any progress. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Minto. Any further board discussion on this item? Mr. Pimentel, I'll ask a couple of questions. There's kind of been a subtext to the conversation about what went wrong. I mean, is there anything specific that you would like to attribute the failure of this to produce the results that you were looking for, number one? And number two, where do you see things going from here?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. And I will say that with regards to lack of progress on key priorities, I really do think that what we found ourselves faced with were major structural challenges with the task force itself. CEO Cooney acknowledged some of those issues in terms of the timing and time allotment for big items of discussion like funding. She noted that really that conversation that was looking to advance recommendations reserved for the last meeting, and it was not the only item on the agenda for the last meeting. And so it meant that we had probably hours of conversation rather than what could have been days, weeks, months of conversation to move that forward. Structurally as well, I would note for you that there wasn't a break in the policy development. You would imagine that a task force is doing much of the work of ideating potential solutions, potential recommendations, debating those, and then coming to an agreement on which of those would advance. But as the CEO had noted, a lot of that work ultimately driven by Cal STA, Caltrans staff with a group of subject matter experts that I would note was never disclosed to the task force, meaning we did not know who was driving particular recommendations forward. That meant that when recommendations ultimately were brought to our task force for review, these augmented some of those that we put on the table as ourselves as task force members. There was general curiosity on the derivation of those recommendations, the impact, the potential unintended consequences of recommendations. And so that just meant that we would have to, as a body, simply oppose or kick back recommendations for further review. And so again, there were structural challenges there. I think finally, it was noted that we ourselves did not have final visibility on the final report. And so there were some things that in that final meeting I noted we voted to advance. Funding is a key area of that focus, where we did vote to move forward a menu of options. We had a group of about 12 funding recommendations that we had advanced. That was voted and approved by a majority, I would argue a super majority of the task force. The final report relegated it to, in essence, a footnote observation that that vote was had was not included in the report and its recommendation. So again, there were final reviews that we did not have oversight over. Finally, to your question about kind of where we go from here, kind of next steps, our association regularly convenes our members, surveys our members for topic priorities, things that we can pursue as legislation. We do that throughout the year, but in particular in the advancement of annual legislative programs. Your agency, for example, has been highly influential in informing our priorities as an association. We're going to have to continue that work in the years ahead. Much of that will focus in the near term on funding, where we're going to have to do a deeper analysis of the deep funding needs of our agencies, and then to consider what may be funding solutions that actually meet those needs as they exist. And then on the TDA reform front, we have in years past convened a TDA reform task force. We've produced reports of recommendations to the legislature. We are going to have to bring that body back again, drive that work forward ourselves to help inform the conversation at the legislative level. Because again, at the state level, through the Cal STA, those work products are not going to advance. And so again, more from us in the years ahead. But again, would just note that your agency highly participatory in this work, and so will be key in driving our agenda forward.
Thank you, Mr. Pimentel, and thank you again for joining us this morning. We appreciate your insight, and thank you, of course, to our CEO for all of her efforts in this regard as well. All right, we'll move on to item 16. Item 16 is an informational update on the San Diego Transit Corporation pension investment status. Mike Thompson is going to kick off our presentation.
Good morning. My name is Mike Thompson. I'm the Deputy CFO here at MTS. Today we're talking, usually every year we take 2 items to the board related to the San Diego Transit Employees Pension Plan. This plan affects about 16% of the overall MTS population. There's 268 active employees as of July 1 of last year. We do have other pension plans at MTS that are administered by CalPERT, but this San Diego Transit Pension Plan is administered by MTS. So each year we talk about the investments in the actual reports to the board. I am joined by Eric Williams. He is our representative from RVK, our investment consultant, and he's going to go over the investments of the fund and the performance. Eric.
Thank you very much, Mike. Good morning, everyone. Yes, my name is Eric Williams. I'm with RVK. And this morning I'm going to run you through the structure and the performance of the pension plan. So starting on the first page here, we have the investment structure. In the box, you can see we have three distinct asset classes: broad domestic equity, broad international equity, and fixed income. You can see the target allocations there on the right. So 25% for domestic equity or domestic stocks, 20% for international stocks, and then 55% for bonds. This is a bit of a conservative portfolio, and that is very much intentional due to the unique liability structure this plan has, being a mature and closed plan, so there's no new money coming in. As such, we have reduced the risk of this plan, and you can see that in the middle of the page. In 2011, right as this plan was closing, it had 16% volatility or standard deviation of the plan, a higher equity portfolio, and we've moved that down to a 10% volatility, so significantly reducing the risk of the plan, moving more into bonds or safer assets. Investment details are on the following page. This is detailed by manager. So you can see the breakout. We have 4 US equity funds, 2 international equity funds, and 3 low-cost bond funds. So these assets are diversified across these 9 different strategies. And just to note, last year we did remove some of the higher cost alternative strategies. We took them out of the portfolio and increased the amount we allocated to bonds, given the increased yields we're seeing with those assets. Performance on the following page here. So during the fiscal year, both US and international equities gave us very robust returns. Bonds also give us meaningfully positive returns, right? As yields come down, bond prices goes up. They have that inverse relationship, which we saw during the fiscal year. And then you can kind of see our progression throughout the fiscal year. We started the year at 194 million. We had about 20 million in investment gains, leaving us at the end of the fiscal year at that $208 million. So very happy to see that above $200 million. Very proud of that. The return was 10.2%, so that very easily beat our actual return of 6%. So we beat that by 4.2%. We have the longer term performance on this page. So you can see on that 1-year number, again, that's that same 10.2%. Over 5 years, we're at 6.7. Again, these are annualized numbers, 6.7 annualized over 5 years. 10 years, we are a little under that 6% at 5.4. And then over the very long term, we're at 8.5%. So well above that 6% actual rate of return. And just a reminder that, year over year, returns will definitely fluctuate depending on what the markets give us. But over the short and the long run, historically, the portfolio has outperformed that 6% hurdle. Just an update for 2026. So the first 6 months of the next fiscal year, ending at the end of last year, the return is at 4.6%. So we're halfway through the fiscal year, but we're over 75% of the way to our 6% return. So good to see that. And markets continue to move in our favor going into 2026. So in summary, asset classes are, the plans are well diversified across asset classes and products. The allocation is more conservative, very much by design, given the closed and mature nature of the plan. And we feel the portfolio is well positioned to move forward. So that would conclude my presentation, and happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you very much. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We have no public comments, Chair.
All right, we will now open board discussion on this item. It is an informational item, and we'll begin our conversation with Director Moreno.
Thank you for the presentation. Can you remind the board what workers make up the San Diego Transit Corporation?
San Diego Transit Corporation is the bus side, so it has our drivers and our mechanics in that plan.
This is
And as well
only,
as some of the management employees on the San Diego Transit side.
so management employees, some bus, and some mechanics,
Right, and some management employees.
some
Management employees on the bus side.
Got you, management employees on the bus side. Okay, okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Director Moreno. Any further discussion on this item? All right, seeing none, thank you very much for the presentation. We appreciate it. We'll move on to item 17, which is an action item. It is the San Diego Transit Corporation Employee Retirement Plan's actuarial valuation as of July 1st, 2025. Mike Thompson is going to get us started on this presentation as well.
For this presentation, every year we bring back the experience of the plan over the last year, and we basically update the funding plan, which is called the actuary report, of how we're going to fund these benefit payments over the long haul. So I have Ann Harper and Alice Ellsberg here from Chiron. They are our actuaries, and they're going to present the revised report to you. As you remember, in the fall, we also talked about changing some of the assumptions on how we calculate the annual contribution and potentially lowering our annual contribution to save money that we could use towards our fiscal cliff. So they'll also be talking about that as well. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Mike. So as Mike said, I'm Alice Ellsberg, and to my left is my colleague Ann Harper. We will be presenting the results of the 2025 actuarial valuation. And then the second half of our presentation will focus on the amortization policy, which is an element of the contribution on an annual basis. So to start things off today, we'll have a look at the background to understand the pension system as a whole and the dynamics of that system. We will look at the contribution for fiscal year 2026, 2027 under the current amortization policy. We'll go over plan history to see some of the metrics of the plan over the past 10 years, and then look at projections to see where the plan is headed based on the current funded policy. And then our focus will turn to the amortization policy review. And that amortization policy has an element which determines the calculation of the contributions on an annual basis. So starting us off, the big picture, this pension tank from the 1965 Harvard Business Review still holds today to understand a pension system and the mechanics of that system. So the size of this tank represents the actuarial liability. And the actuarial liability, that's the actuarial term for the value of the benefits, the pension benefits that have been promised to date. The water in the fund are the assets. How much money does the plan hold to pay those promised benefits? Well, how do we acquire assets to pay these benefits? There are two mechanisms. One is from the investment policy and those investment earnings, and one is from the funding policy, and that funding policy being the contributions from MTS, from the employer, and from the members. So Eric with RVK discussed the investment policy, understanding where the plan sits today in terms of its asset allocation, with the expected return of 6%. So that 6% assumption, that discount rate or investment rate of return assumption, is the expected investment returns to fill the tank with assets to meet those liabilities. And then the funding policy, that's the side of the asset, acquiring assets, which comes from member contributions. And the majority of your members, the members that are in this plan, they pay 8% of their pay on a biweekly basis to help fund their portion of the pension benefits. And then there's the employer contributions, which we'll get into in a moment. And these assets are accumulated in order to meet the benefits. And the goal of every pension plan is to pay those promised benefits. Ensure that the assets are there to pay the promised benefits to your members. And then there are expenses which are associated with running a pension fund. So here we'll focus on the components of the contribution. So contributions come into the plan by way of the setup funding policy. And the funding policy for this plan consists of three components. There's the normal cost, and the normal cost is an actuarial term for the benefits earned in a given year by the active members. So when a member is active, they accrue service, there's a benefit associated with that 1 year of service. That's the normal cost. So that's one element that gets paid for on an annual basis. And then there's the unfunded actuarial liability payment. When we looked at the overall tank, the size of the tank was larger than the water, the assets in that tank. The gap between the assets and the liability, that is the unfunded actuarial liability. And that unfunded actuarial liability needs a plan to get filled to pay off the assets that are the shortfall compared to the liability. And when we get into the amortization policy discussion today, that's regulating the valve for that item. How is that shortfall going to be paid off? What is the current policy for paying that amortization payment compared to alternative policies for paying that unfunded actuarial liability? And then the third component are those administrative expenses, the expected administrative expenses year over year to manage the pension fund. So in total, this total contribution, in order to get MTS's portion of the contribution, it's less the member contributions, which sit around 8% for the majority of the active members. And those employee contributions are coming from the active membership. So in the current fiscal year, so fiscal year 2025, 2026, the total contribution to the plan was 21.2 million. Moving to the bottom of this chart, the contribution that's scheduled based on the current amortization policy for the next fiscal year, so 2026, 2027, sits at 21.9 million. The difference in that contribution, the 624 million, is made up of the components which are outlined in this table. So every year when we perform an actuarial valuation, we calculate the size of the tank, the liabilities, and compare it to the assets, the water in that tank. If there's experience on the asset side, investment experience different than expected, that's going to impact the contribution. If there's experience on the membership and the liability side, so are people retiring, terminating, when did they die, are their salaries increasing as expected, then you're going to see liability experience different from 1 year to the next. And there's a few other miscellaneous factors. So as Eric from RVK reported, there was a very favorable investment return for the year ending June 30, 2025 at 10%, which is higher than the assumed rate of return for the actuarial valuation. But there are deferred gains because we don't mark to market when looking at the unfunded actuarial liability. We compare to an actuarial value of assets. So markets have volatility, and actuarial value of assets smooths that volatility in order to have a target for funding. So on an actuarial basis, there was a return of 5.8%, which is a very slight loss, and that together means that the contribution increased by 35,000 for the coming year. Liability experience increased the contribution by 628,000. That liability experience was largely driven by the active membership salaries higher than expected. So when they're earning a benefit slightly higher than assumed, then that's going to come at a cost on the pension benefit side. And some other miscellaneous factors for a net change of 624,000. When we perform an actuarial valuation, we look at a single moment in time. In this case, the 2025 valuation. What is the status of the plan, the calculated liabilities as of July 1st, 2025? But it's not only the results of the current valuation that matter. It's important to gain perspective. Where has the plan been and where is the plan going? So the next few slides will cover plan history to see where the plan was on some key metrics. So over the last 10 years contributions, in the leftmost bar, we see the total contributions in 2016 to the plan were 15.1 million. In the rightmost bar in 2025, based on this valuation and the current amortization policy, that contribution sits at 21.9 million. The colored bars are very important to show the progress that your plan has made to achieve more conservative, more prudent assumptions when valuing the liabilities and setting that contribution. So over the period shown, the discount rate assumption, or that assumed rate of return, has decreased from 7.5% to 6%. And with decreasing that interest rate, you're increasing the value of the liabilities. And so the contribution rate in turn increases. But this puts the position in a better funded status because contributions are coming in to meet the expectations of that liability. At 6%, that's the appropriate discount rate for your plan. It's actually the lowest in California, but your plan is largely closed. So you have a very different outlook in terms of the strategy and your asset allocation for a largely closed pension plan. So that 6% sits at the appropriate rate with given the structure of the plan. And then the mortality assumptions have also been updated over these past 10 years. We see the studies, we read the headlines, we know, and we as actuaries dive into the nitty-gritty of these studies, people are living longer. So those benefit payouts are getting paid out for a longer term, and you are capturing that with your contribution payments to the fund. And that's each of the colored layers shows the increases from those assumption changes. In terms of funding over the last 10 years and that funded ratio, the top of these bars are the liability. So the value of the benefits or the size of the tank. So we see from 2016 to 2025, the size of those liabilities has increased. The gold portion of these bars represents the assets in the tank. This gray portion is the unfunded actuarial liability. And the line with the percentages is the funded ratio. So today in 2025, from the valuation, the funded ratio sits at 58.6%. So that means there are 58 cents to every dollar of benefit liability. And it may look like the plan has not made progress in terms of that funded ratio, but as we showed in the prior slide, the assumptions have strengthened to a point that you are meeting the expectations of these liabilities. And the projections, which we'll see shortly, are showing that this funded ratio is scheduled to increase based on the plan's funded policy. So it's important to understand that the assumptions that are in place do correctly reflect the full liability of the plan. And a final slide on plan history is taking a look at the membership composition and compare it to the liabilities. The two pie charts on the left show the head count and the liabilities based on status in 2015. And the two pie charts on the right show the head count and liabilities in the plan currently in 2025. And we see in the top pie chart in terms of head count, in 2015, the retirees, so those collecting a benefit, retired disabled beneficiaries, made up 53% of the population in this plan. And as the plan has matured, we're now sitting at 71% of the plan is attributable to retirees, so those in pay status, and that active population is diminishing. So that active population went from 34% to 18% of the membership in this plan. And the liabilities follow a similar transition, moving from 62% of retiree payments to 69% of liability from retirees. And with that, I'll turn it over to Anne to take a look at the future projections.
Thank you, Alice. So these projections, like everything so far in the presentation, are based on the current funding policy. The bars represent the liabilities and the lines represent the assets. It is important to note, and it was interesting with your plan, since it is a closed plan, that these liabilities are gradually decreasing over time as members pass, and there are very few new entrants that are coming into the plan. So those liabilities are expected to decrease over time. And the funded ratio sits at 59% today. It is projected to steadily progress until it reaches 100% in 2037, when the UAL under the current funding policy is scheduled to be paid off. Now, looking at the projected contributions of your plan, the contribution is expected to spike up a little bit in 2028. Some of that is due to that liability loss in 2025 and recognizing some deferred losses in the assets in 2022, but then is expected to decrease over time as favorable asset experience is recognized and as fewer and fewer number of active members are accruing benefits. And then when that UAL is fully paid, the contribution decreases down to what is called, again, that normal cost, the very few members left in the plan who are still accruing some benefits, and your administrative expenses. Are there any questions so far? Because now we're going to move on to the amortization policy in the review.
We do have a question from Director Downey.
Just one. As we negotiate new contracts with our workers, so that if we give a raise, then how is that factored into when projecting as the amount that our liability is going to need to be increased? Is it done at that time, or do we go back and do it retroactively?
So when members get pay raises,
yes,
we recognize them in the year that they get paid. So when we see the salaries go up from year to year, we model that into our projections, and we project their benefits to be increasing a little bit higher than if they're higher than we anticipated. So we use that to project their future salaries at that time, at that valuation date when we're looking at that.
Okay, and as we're seeing where the lines cross and we either have a deficit or an advance, we have more than we need to, that's not reflected in the charts that we saw, because some of the growth of the increase is because people live longer, so the benefits are going to have to last longer, but also because their salaries went up. So I appreciate the presentation. I appreciate the staff report. I guess my question is, we are doing everything correctly. We are anticipating all those. We're funding correctly. There's nothing that we should be doing different in terms of how we're funding.
Correct. In terms of the assumptions, yes, because we are projecting benefit increases each and every year until they retire. And then we also have assumptions about when they're going to retire. So to the extent that actual experience may be different, which it always is, then we look at the difference. Sometimes there's an actual gain.
Sure.
Sometimes there's an actual loss, and whatever that piece is, we're going to talk about this more, it's amortized over a set period in time.
Just wanted to
Yes. So then you're paying for any changes that happen in that year. So it's a constantly dynamic system. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And we bring it back here every year because of that fact.
Right.
Director Bush.
Yes, so I wanted to thank the consultant team for this report. The visualizations, I think, are really helpful to me because these concepts are often such a mathematical nebulous. So really seeing those valves, like it just helps, and it's a good refresher. So I really appreciate that. And it does sound like, in your opinion, that we are on fairly good footing then, right? Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say.
Okay. I appreciate that. And that's really good news given how many public agencies face a crisis when it comes to this. And I always try to do this. I really want to give a special shout out to member Moreno for having the foresight on this. I can't remember if I was, when he first brought this issue up, I think I was actually staffing Georgette at the time. And when you brought this up, you were kind of the outlier to raise these concerns. And it turned out to be true. Even I thought, oh, I think she's being a little conservative on this, but really you were spot on. And I just appreciate you taking a stake and kind of like a leadership in this. And I learned from that. So I just really want to appreciate you, Member Moreno, because you were the first one and really the leader of the board of making this an issue and kind of warning us to just lower our projections on this. And even though we took a bit of a hit in the short run, in the long run, it did benefit. So I just really want to appreciate you for that. Thank you.
The importance, especially of the projections, is to exactly see what your liabilities look like in the future, what we're projecting your assets to look like, and how your funding policy is paying off your unfunded over time. If you don't show projections, we as actuaries know what's going to happen. But sometimes having the projections helps us even understand it better, right? And it also helps you all understand.
And helps what are we on with our, and it sounds like we're spot on. So because 35,000, how like that, it's hard to kind of conceptualize how much, like from a percentage, I think it was what, 0.3 points or what, it's hard for me to conceptualize what that means, but I feel like it's pretty much spot on. We're spot on.
When you say 35,000?
Because you said we were off. I thought the figure, if you go back a few slides,
on
the investments, we're off like 35,000, correct?
Right. And that's with a smoothing method. We take assets, gains and losses every year, and we only recognize a fifth of them. And so over a 5-year period, we've recognized all of those asset gains and losses in the calculation of the assets that we use to compare to the liabilities. So we just calculate a smooth value of these assets. So from 2025, there was actually a gain, right? And next year, hopefully if markets stay stable till the end of 2026, you're actually going to see a gain because we have years of deferred gains build up in our smooth value of assets over the last 3 years. So anyway, if there are not any more questions, I'll move on to the amortization policy because this does change the projections that you're seeing right now with the new amortization policy, but you're going to see that we're still on track to pay off that unfunded. So, okay, so moving on. So what is a funding policy and what is its purpose? Well, the main purpose of a funding policy is to pre-fund the benefits through contributions that are going to accumulate over time so that they are sufficient enough to pay for the member and their beneficiaries' benefits when they're due. So there are 3 principal elements of a funding policy. We are only focusing today on the amortization policy, and that's the policy to pay off your unfunded actuarial liability. So what are the pieces of a funding policy? Well, it determines how that unfunded gets paid. And that's those levers that Alice was talking about, the contribution levers. How much are they opened or closed? And then there's also the structure of the UAL payments. You want to make sure that those payments are structured so that the gap in the tank doesn't increase even when all assumptions are met. You want to make sure that that gap, if all your assumptions are being met, is going to shrink over time so you'll approach fully funding. There are ways to structure the payments so that they're either a level % of payroll or a level dollar. And with your plan, we do level dollar because it's a closed plan mostly, so that dollar amount is the same each and every year for each layer. And then there are layered bases, or you can have one single base. Your plan has layered bases. And then the payment years with these layered bases can vary depending on the source of the change in the UAL. And that means there can be different layers for amortization or for assumption changes, for actual gains and losses, for plan amendments if there were ever to be some. And then lastly, the most important part of an amortization policy is you need to strike a balance between contribution stability, the affordability of that contribution, and, as I said, most importantly, is the benefit security for your members. And this balance comes through the length of time. At the request of MTS, we performed a study back in September detailing 4 reasonable alternatives to the current policy. So how did we develop these different alternatives? Well, as actuaries, we are set to adhere to certain guidelines. We have first the actuarial standards of practice, which we must follow. And those outline how we should be setting assumptions, how we develop reasonable actuarially determined contribution, and also in communicating our results in our reports and our presentations so that there's transparency in the work that we do. There's also the actuarial organizations that we are part of that develop research papers detailing what a acceptable funding policy looks like. So with this framework, we came up with all 4 of these different policies. Staff and the executive committee last year took a look at this, or not last year, last week took a look at this, and the executive committee accepted the second one there. That is a reset of your entire UAL over one base over a 20-year closed period. So this slide here is showing the current policy that you have, and then this alternative policy. The both policies have these layered bases. I did say we're going to consolidate that UAL over one base, but future bases will be added for other actual gains and losses. But they're layered bases, they're level dollar payments. The current policy was set back in 2012 to amortize the UAL over a 25-year period. This alternative policy resets the outstanding balance of that UAL as of 2025 over a 20-year period. The current policy right now has, for each new layer of unfunded accrued liability, they have declining payment years, meaning as 2027 approaches, each year gets shorter and shorter that you're amortizing new unfunded over, so it can result in contribution volatility as 2027 approaches. The alternative funding policy has subsequent changes in your unfunded accrued liability amortized over 10 years, each and every year going forward, which produces more stable contributions. So this is the projection of the contributions under the alternative amortization policy. That dark blue line at the top is your current funding policy. The gold bars are the contributions under the alternative funding policy. And you can see that the contributions are notably lower through 2038, but then extend for an additional 8 years over that, for a full 20-year period. The teal line is what's called the tread water level. And the tread water level, if you picture that tank again, that gap in the tank, that level of contributions would keep that unfunded accrued liability exactly the same over time, even if all assumptions are met. So contributions above that tread water level, which this funding policy does produce, means that the gap, that unfunded accrued liability, is going to decrease over time. You're chipping away at principal on that unfunded accrued liability, even with this funding policy, and a substantial amount. So what this is actually showing too is that this new funding policy, because you're chipping away at principal, that you are moving towards that benefit security that is definitely part of one of the key components of a funding policy, to make sure there are enough benefits in the future to pay for your membership. And then finally, we have the funded ratio projections under both the current and alternative funding policy. On the top is the funded ratio under the current policy. You can see that it reaches projected to reach 100% in 2037 if all assumptions are met. And under the alternative funding policy, the bar to reach 100% funding is pushed out because you have a longer extended period of time that you're paying out that unfunded accrued liability payment. But it's important also to note that each and every year you are expected to make progress in your funded ratio under this new policy.
So with that, I'll summarize real quick. So staff is recommending to change this UAL amortization period from the current 12 years remaining to 2037 to a 20-year term, resetting that. This will impact the calculation of the annual contribution, and it would reduce that contribution for 2027 from about 22 million to about 16.5 million. So it is a savings of approximately $5.4 million. And we will also see similar savings from 28 through 32 as well, about the $5 million range. And the reason we're doing this is we do have a large structural deficit. We're trying to get to 2030 through a ballot measure and be able to have some sustainability through that period of time. That's the reason we're recommending this. We can always revisit this at any point in time and change the amortization policy again, but this is a recommendation for today. It does extend that UAL being fully paid off from 2037 to 2045, and there's a cost to that. But it'll also reduce future contribution volatility as we get to that closer to that 2037 timeline. As Ann mentioned, it could have major swings in what that contribution looks like based on the gains and losses of those years leading up to it. And once again, we want to reiterate, this doesn't have any impact on the benefits earned by employees. It doesn't impact the employee contribution. It is just a calculation of how we're going to fund the plan. It doesn't impact the benefits of the employees at all. And with that, I'll get to the staff recommendation that the MTS Board of Directors receive both retirement plan actuarial evaluation reports. Attachment A is the current assumption policy, and attachment B is the alternative policy. And then adopt staff recommendation to adopt the staff recommended UAL amortization from the current 12-year remaining term to a recalibrated 20-year amortization. And finally, adopt the resulting pension contribution amount of $16,470,975 for fiscal year 2027. And with that, we'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do. Blair Bickman, if you can please unmute yourself.
Hi, Blair Beekman. Thanks a lot for this item. It was really nice to hear. It was incredibly informative. I wanted to raise my hand for the previous item for the same purpose and cause. It was a really nice report that just gave current pension financial things that are going on with it right now. It was just a good report and a good learning experience for myself, how our current practices are working economic wise. It was a really great lesson in that, and just really simple and decent. Thank you for it, and knowledgeable, helpful. Good luck in this sort of continued efforts in what you're sharing with these two items. They're incredibly important teaching tools for ourselves and really helpful, and continue good luck that in these sort of explanations and what you'll be working on with these items. Thank you.
That concludes public comments, Chair.
Thank you, Clerk. We'll open board discussion on this item. It is an action item. Motion would be in order. We'll begin our conversation with Vice Chair Goebel.
Thank you for an excellent report and breaking it down into language hopefully we all can understand. I'd be glad to go ahead and move the staff recommendation.
All right. Thank you, Vice Chair Goebel. I will second the staff recommendation. We'll go to Director Moreno.
Thank you. And thank you for the report. I think it was somebody's dad who was a plumber, right? That brought us the visual, which I'm a visual person. So it's very helpful to see it. You mentioned something and I didn't catch what you said. We're expected to something funded ratio in our policy. I know that's horrible. I don't know if you remember. One of the last things you said, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name in the middle. It was like one of the last sentences you said that we're expected to funded ratio in your policy.
You're talking about?
Yes.
Oh,
to
I'm
reach
sorry.
100%.
To reach. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking to Alice. Yes, we are expected with the new funding policy or alternative funding policy to reach 100% funding in 2045. And I think what was also very important, and maybe this is what you missed, is that each and every year you can see that the funded ratio is increasing over time with this funding policy. There's no year where we're expecting it to decrease, assuming all actuarial assumptions are met. That's a key phrase there.
Okay, and the question that I had also is, Can you explain how much additional costs we would incur by extending the amortization by 20 years instead of keeping the current timeline?
So in terms of the different contributions going into the plan,
Would it basically, would we incur any extra costs?
well, over time, since you are extending that amortization period from 12 right now to 20, you will have extra contributions that will be coming into the plan over time to meet that cost. So the difference in the cost really, if you go to this slide, right? If you look at the contributions through 2038 and you add those up less, and then compare them to the contributions in this slide, you would get an approximate increase in the contributions over time because you are extending that period.
And what is that amount?
I have not calculated that.
Well,
amount,
and
yeah.
keep in mind, it's over a period of time. It depends on wins and losses in the investment pool. I think what you're probably trying to get at is what do we miss out on in investment return on investment in the pool? Because that's where the difference when you extend it out is, because you're not putting in the large payments up front, you might miss out on the return on investment. But that's always a reserve issue for public agencies because, we could put all our money into a reserve, but we're not spending it on what we need to spend it on.
I got you. And that was, part of the discussion in 2019, right? About the 6% versus, I think it was 7.5. But obviously, if I have a credit card and I extend the debt of the credit card for 20 years, I'm going to end up paying more, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the number that I'm trying to figure out. How much more? I get it that we're going to save $5 million, which I think is fantastic right now, but what are we leaving for future boards of MTS? That's my question. How much money will this cost based on the assumptions that you have with the mortality rates?
Well, is it really the period of 2039 and on that is the difference? It normally was about $1 million a year when we've actually have that UAA paid off, and now it's going to be going to $12 million. So we are pushing that amount out to the future generations. It would have been paid off in 2039, but now it's not going to get paid off till 2045. So it's really those amounts in the out years is really the difference.
So it's about 12 million.
It's 12 million, yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I heard a colleague speak. Did they say 12 million each year?
12 million each year.
So that's not 12 million. That's if I'm gonna let me take out my calculator here, and sorry, I have to do this to everybody, but the number is not provided. So 2038, we got what? 12.1. And then 2039, we got 12.4. And then 40, we got 12.8. And then the next year we got 13. We got 13 again. Then we got 12.9, 12.9 plus 12.9. And this is considering that the Wall Street does what it does and that we get a return of, what was it?
6%.
6%. We're looking at $102 million more.
It would not be 102 million
It would
because you
not?
do have the offset in the earlier years where the
Gotcha.
contribution is lower.
So I would
So
like
it
to get
will
that
be
number.
in the millions. So you're essentially going from a 12-year payment period to a 20-year payment period. All of those funds are going into these benefits, but the value of the benefits are not changing. It continues to be these benefits that are going to the members. It's the timing of paying for those benefits.
And that's, I understand. I understand what you're saying. There's actual contributions by the members that are still alive, that are still part of the program plan, right? Our pension plan.
No, I don't. What you're saying is that you think it's only the contributions of the members. That's not true. Every year we will be contributing as an agency.
We'll be contributing as an agency, the contribution of our members, and also the interest rate that we're going to get in return, considering that we have a good year. So I initially felt uneasy about this, obviously understanding our budget constraints. As you were presenting, I felt a little bit better, right? There's a tremendous amount of trust. But now, because I don't have a number, you guys are not providing me a number, it makes me a little uneasy. And I understand that it's hard to decipher how much it's going to actually cost in 2046.
So just doing the math in my head right now, if you took all these payments and compared them to the payments in the previous amortization policy, it would be somewhere between probably 25 and $40 million.
25 to $40 million. Okay.
I think it's important to note is the actual benefits earned is what we're going to pay. This is just how we pay it. So the benefit earned is going to be $300 million based on the latest projection over the next 60 years. That number doesn't change with this. It's just how we pay that down.
Yeah.
And
No,
that's
I
basically,
understand.
they treat that unfunded piece today as a loan, but it's really, we could pay as we go. It's really up to the board to determine how those payments work. It's our payments going into our plan. It's not actual more cash leaving out the door.
No, I understand what you're saying, but at the end of the day, we're going to save money today, but we're going to be paying in the duration of this date about 25 to $40 million more.
And to note though, just one of the really important thing about amortization policies is you, the board, have the discretion at any point in time in the future
I get
to
it.
change it. So
I
let's
have
say-
1 year left, not even the year. I have 10 months left. And the way that I vote obviously is going to impact future boards. And
Right.
I consider myself, what do I consider myself? Conservative when it comes to financing. Dare I say, I'm not comfortable with this. I'll let my colleagues speak just so I could hopefully get to a yes. But as of right now, I'm a no on this.
Do we not have the data basically right in front of us? I mean, could we not simply add up the projected contributions that we have under the current amortization policy through 2046? I mean, that's like 20 digits, and then do the same thing for the, I mean, I feel like we've got the data right in front of us.
Right.
We'll
The
just take a
one thing you
calculator.
have to remember though, when you're looking at the extended amortization policy is the figures after 2039, they all include about $1 million or $1.5 million in normal cost payments for the members that are still left in the plan at that point. So you would have to subtract probably about $10 million from whatever that figure is. Yeah.
Yes, we can calculate it. We just don't have it right now. That's all we're saying. So she estimated it in her head between 25 and 40 million.
And
But again, it's not making payments to anybody else. It's payments into our own plan.
And ultimately, whatever that number is going to be a best guesstimate based on today's actuarial studies
Correct.
and the investment portfolio that we know today with the 6% assumption.
That's right.
And Chair, for the record, I do want to state that I did ask for this number. My staff did ask for this number yesterday.
Okay.
Yes, late yesterday.
So let me ask this. I mean, when you're talking about a refinancing, a home refinancing, and the amortization, you're talking about an additional cost because you've got additional interest involved, right? And so when we're extending the amortization of this plan, are we incurring additional cost because there is an additional payments that we have to make above and beyond what we, in other words, are we just stretching out or are we incurring additional cost?
Okay, so this literally is like refinancing a mortgage. You have a set amount of the unfunded as of 2025, which is about 150 million. You're currently paying that off over a 12-year period. When you extend it to 20 years, it's just a straight another amortization over a 20-year period. So of course, there is more interest involved, interest that you're paying, but you're paying it into the fund, right? It's the UAL payment is going into the fund. And so you're just extending and shrinking those payments over 20 years instead of higher payments over 12.
So, and if I may add to that, right now, the unfunded actuarial liability sits at approximately 150 million. So if you wanted to crank the valve and pay off the full 150 million, we know that today's payment would be 150 million. Pay it all off, fund the plan to 100%. But what's important is to look at the balancing objectives of your system, of your ridership, of your members, of your plan, to see what is the prudent action in balancing that benefit security and those contributions. So under the current policy, that 150 million is getting paid over 12 years at 6% versus 20 years at 6%. So it's clearly a higher interest cost that comes through this with a lower current cost to the plan or a lower current payment. But under both, any scenario, you're reaching that full funding. So it's the timing of the payment.
Sure. So I understand, I support doing this. And I understand that we're stretching out the payments, and I understand that we're incurring some additional cost over time to do that. But I think Director Moreno's question is a fairly simple one, which is just adding up.
We were not prepared with that
I mean,
value.
can't we just do that fairly quickly? Is that not something we could do with a calculator fairly
Larry,
quickly here?
can you please have somebody on your budget staff do that calculation now?
I mean, it seems like we can get that number, no?
Just
yes.
ask for it.
Chair. Chair.
Director Minto, yes, you had a question.
Yeah, because I hear all this conversation and what I'm seeing is that the answer is not as easy as you say. If you look at it at face value, it could be, but there's a lot of factors that go into this. For instance, over time, there's going to be compounding effects to the money that is collected and goes into the general fund. So that will offset. So when you think about a 6%, interest payment, and so now you have other investments that actually are going into the fund, and over time we're not really losing the money that you're talking about because it gets compounded also. So over time, that percentage that we're saving on the yearly value gets compounded. So every year that we save money annually, it reduces that also. It just goes into a different kind of fund though, that helps with operation, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, let's say it's $40 million, but when you start saying the savings every year is a certain amount, and I don't know what that amount is, and you start putting that into the bank, so to speak, and you start generating interest on that, it lowers really your interest base for what you're paying on that. So that 6% really is, if you offset them, you maybe are only paying 3 to 5%. And so that's what's really making up the difference on the long end of the $40 million. So the calculation really is a lot more complicated, and there's unknowns because we don't know exactly what percentage you're going to create by having a longer term loan. And then also based on the investments, you don't know what the return's going to be on that. So it's almost impossible to say that it is actually $40 million, because it could be a lot less. Actually, it could be maybe even some more than that. But
And yeah, exactly. So that number is based on every single actuarial assumption that we use to create and calculate the liabilities. And we know that every year that is not the case. And really what's going to determine your contributions is the actual experience of your plan. It's going to determine the cost of those benefits.
Yeah, and that also, correct me if I'm wrong, but that also is determined also based on the number of people in that plan. Because if you're adding employees and you're not having a diminished number of employees for certain reasons, that can change things. But if you have You could have that gray wave, or tsunami again, they called it. And now you're paying for a lot more retirees. So that could also change. So I don't think we can actually look at the actual number and say, well, in 2045, it's going to be $40 million, because it may not be.
Thank you, Director Minto. Let's go to Director Downey.
I think this gets back to my initial question. Part of what I was struggling with before, and I think it's why we can't get a firm number, is the smoothing effort that you do, because we don't get 6% every year. Some years it might be more than that, some years less. And so when you even out that smoothing to put it over the 10-year, I think you told me is how you
5 years. Yeah.
5 years. So that's why I was trying to, I asked the question I did to figure out, are we with that smoothing effort able to meet the numbers? And you said yes. So is that part of why
The
we're not?
smoothing mechanism for the assets is included in these contribution rates. And or not rates, the contribution dollars. So the smoothing is included. And we do assume, though, going forward, that the plan on a market value basis will earn 6% each and every year.
Okay, going forward.
Going forward,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Director Downey. Let's go to Director Elo Rivera.
Thank you, Chair. I'm probably getting out over my skis and even asking this question, but what the hell? One of the things I'm trying to understand also is the way in which, or present versus future value of the money is factored in, if at all. The $10 million payment in 2032 is not the same as a $10 million payment in 2042. Does this account for that? And if not, we're just adding variables at this point to make it even more confusing for all of us. But I also do want to know if that's accounted
No,
for.
those are in today's dollars, those contribution amounts are, but the liabilities that we value, we do discount those to today's date. So the liabilities are a present value of future liabilities, but that $13 million in 2038 is $13 million as of today's dollars.
So when we're talking about pushing out the cost, we're talking about that in present day numbers, right? And so there is going to be some reduction in value of what that actual payment is compared to paying it earlier on, if that made any sense at all. I think it does, because someone's nodding. But we can't do that with a lot of precision. We just know, or can be fairly certain in assuming that money today is going to be different in value than it will be tomorrow. And that trend will continue over time.
So the one thing, or not just one thing about your plan, but the fact that your plan is closed, we can predict with some certainty that it's going to your liabilities will decrease each and every year, which makes your plan less risky than most plans, right? That's number one. Number two is your assumed rate of return is only 6%, but it matches your asset allocation because it's a conservative closed plan. So you have conservative assets, which also takes risk off the table in terms of comparing yourself to other pension plans. So, and we also talked about the mortalities also in there. So the assumptions we're using are conservative and appropriate. It's a declining population, so declining liabilities. So the risks associated with those numbers is much smaller than you would see in other pension plans.
Okay. I think that's it.
Your point is well taken. All right. Thank you, Director Elo Rivera. Yes, Larry.
Yeah, so just doing the quick calculation of taking the contributions over that term, again, very quickly done, about $51 million. And so the one thing I'd like to just point out is at the end of the day in let's say it's 2080 or whenever that last benefit has been paid, we are going to be paying the exact same amount. This is a question of when do we pay it? And so do we put more money into our investment pool to generate additional interest for the plan to help those subsequent payments? Or do we save $5 million today and not put so much into our savings account and to our investment pool, just given our fiscal challenges at this point?
So what I think I heard you just say is that the amount of money that will be paid into the system will be the same regardless of the length of the amortization.
And did you want to speak to that?
So the amount of money that you're paying into the system, what Larry, the point he was trying to make is that the money is all there pre-funded, accumulating with interest so that it can pay the benefits to the members. What is actually being paid out to the members is the actual cost of the plan. When you pre-fund something and you hire actuaries to come in to tell you how is it that we're going to fund these benefits for when they're due, right? That's where we come in and do these calculations and give it our best estimates as what the value of these benefits are for the actives, how things have in our assumptions have changed over time so that, now we don't have as many assets as we thought we would have accumulated at this point. So we have what's called this unfunded accrued liability. And so we're paying off that unfunded accrued liability. But again, this is all on the basis of the assumptions that we're making about your liabilities. For instance, if we changed the assumed rate of return, it wasn't 6%, let's say it was 4%, your actuarial liability would grow significantly in terms of the value of that liability, because you're assuming you can only earn 4% on your assets. And so if you're earning less on your assets, the contributions have to increase, right? So we're just trying to balance the assets coming into the plan. What are the contributions, and is it going to be enough to pay these benefits when they're due? So we're coming up with this payment plan to pay off the current unfunded accrued liability. But let's say, okay, for example, let's say just a horrific situation. Let's say COVID hit again, but it was much more devastating and 50% of your retirees died. All of a sudden, your liability would shrink tremendously, and what you pay from the plan is different than what we anticipated. So it's the cost all of a sudden decreases, right? And so the benefits that you're paying out would be a lot less costly. Does that make, so it's really what is happening to your populations, and we're trying best to predict what's going to happen to your population, what's going to happen to your assets to determine this payment plan, if you will, to pay off these benefits. But really what matters is what's going to happen to your membership.
Understood.
Right.
And thank you for that explanation. That was a holistic explanation that reflects what the organization's payouts would be to the beneficiaries of the plan. I think that what Director Moreno is looking at is just the total contribution amount, just the total assuming everything else stays the same. The sum of the projected total contribution amount under the current amortization plan versus the sum of the total contribution amount over the 20-year amortization. How different are those two numbers? That's the question.
Yeah, that's the $51 million.
Okay, so by stretching it out, the total contributions would be increased by about $51 million.
Are expected to be increased. That's a key word. They're expected to be increased.
Are expected to be
Yes.
increased by about $51 million.
I just wanted to bring it back to, the real reason we're here is because this is a part of the overall strategy to stretch our operating and capital project money so that we can get to 2030 before we hit the fiscal cliff, to buy us more runway to get to that point. What we haven't discussed is what are we contributing today by not having to cut service to meet the $5 million that we're suggesting to save by amortizing this out. We're also not looking at what deferred maintenance would we be having to do, which would then cost us more in the future. So when you look at all of the decisions that we're trying to make right now in their entirety, we're just trying to come up with a plan that continues to provide the service to our communities while also trying to get a solution to our sustainability problem. And so this, in the overall discussions today about funding, when we look at these things, we also have to look at the public benefits we're trying to preserve as well.
All right, further questions, further discussion? Okay, we have a motion from Vice Chair Goebel that I seconded to adopt the staff recommendation. Clerk, please take the vote.
Members, if you can please make your selections on the tablets. Chair, the motion passes with 12 members voting yes, 2 members voting no, and 1 member absent.
Thank you, Clerk. All right, that concludes our discussion items. We will go to board member or CEO communications. I know that Director Leyva Gonzalez wanted to share some information with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. A few small business owners off of Seacoast reached out to me, and they would like an update for the CCTV security cameras that are initially supposed to have been installed on those new bus stops that are going through Seacoast, which, I mean, they're beautiful. Like, those new bus stops are amazing. Apparently these two small business owners, I don't know who passed that information on to them, but they were on the assumption that they were going to be installed. So they reached out to the sheriff's department as well. They've not been installed. If we can get an update as far as if they are actually going to be installed, and then like a time frame, so that I could repass that message on to them. That's all I have. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Director Leyva Gonzalez. Let's go to Director Mendoza.
I just wanted to take this opportunity to introduce our newest council member in Lemon Grove, Seth Smith. And he was appointed to fill Mr. Fai's seat. And also Seth is going to be my alternate on this board. So anyway, nice to see you here, Councilmember Smith.
Thank you very much, Director Mendoza. Congratulations, Councilmember Smith. We look forward to your presence as appropriate. We will go to Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Stepp.
Thank you so much, Chair. I just want to take just 2 minutes to thank Sharon and team for the Rosa Parks Transit Equity Day celebration at Mesa College. We got an opportunity. I was able to present a proclamation to MTS. We got an opportunity to honor Ibn Edwards, who was the artist, of course, that was here last month. They created the Pronto card for Black History Month, and also saw the bus wrap of the art, which was absolutely amazing. We had a lot of professors and the president of Mesa, along with the chancellor of the community college district, out to honor and celebrate Rosa Parks, her role in transit equity. And we also got to pay homage to Claudette Colvin, who was the 15-year-old who first said, no, I'm not going to sit at the back of the bus. That really prompted the strategy of the civil rights movement and Rosa Parks' role in it. So Claudette Colvin passed away last month, but she was first. And then she prompted really what was a strategic movement within the civil rights that Rosa Parks was the center of. So we got a chance to talk about all that. And I just want to thank staff again because it was a beautiful celebration. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Stepp. Let's go to Director Downey.
I just wanted to bring to the board's attention, I sit as the chair of the Sandag Regional Planning Committee, and we had a public commenter that asked Sandag to look into how we could have charging stations for electric scooters, because many of the people that use our buses take a scooter to get there. And they're often worried that they won't have enough charge at the end of the day once they've done their day and they're worried about getting back home. I promised the speaker and our board at Sandag that I would at least mention it to our staff. I'm not sure what could possibly be done, but I wanted to make sure it was out there because Sandag staff was going to be looking into what could happen into their projects, but I just wanted to bring it to your attention.
Thank you, Director Downey. Vice Chair Goebel.
I'd like to thank staff for putting in a lot of new bus benches out in El Cajon. When it's 75 out here on the coast, it's 95 on the El Cajon Valley floor. And so with extra benches for people to rest, waiting for the buses, it's a good experience. And so thank you, staff, for making that happen.
Thank you, Vice Chair Goebel. Any further communications? Seeing none, the board's next meeting date is on March 19th at 9 o'clock in the morning. We are adjourned.